Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to Kapowski Reads, and this is my June reading wrap up. I usually chat through my reading stats first and then onto the books, but I have forgotten to take a note of my reading stats for this month. So instead, I am going to pop a graphic somewhere with my stats for June. So how many books I've read, pages, and types of books that I've read. And I suppose that means that we can just go straight onto the books. I am going to start with a reread. I have been trying to get back into rereading books that I have previously loved, and this month I read what was my favourite book of June 2022. I read it again in June 2023. Other People's Clothes by Calla Henkel. It is so full of tabs because I loved it the first time I read it, and the second time I read it I still loved it, and I underlined parts as well. So maybe at some point I will take out the tabs and then it'll be easier to put in my shelf. But that's something I'm going to think about later. This book is about a young woman called Zoe who goes off to Berlin to do a term at Berlin Art School. She is just sort of trying to heal after the death of her best friend and takes this as an opportunity to reinvent herself as somebody just super cool and interesting while in Berlin. She is living in the house of an author who is a little bit unusual, and she and her flatmate start to suspect that this author might be using them as inspiration for her new novel, and they decide to give her something to write about. They start having these amazing parties and events, and things quickly get out of hand. I absolutely loved this book first time around. I loved it even more the second time. The dialogue is just so quick, it's so witty, and it really reminded me of the dialogue in Heathers, you know, a film I absolutely love, and the dialogue in Bunny. You know, it was just so fun to read. The characters, none of them are likable. You don't like them, but they are interesting. And I think that that's the thing. You don't have to be a likable, lovable character, but I really need to have something that grips me. And the plot of this gripped me because even though I knew where it was going, I just enjoyed the journey of getting there. And I loved the characters, even though I didn't like the characters. I had two books that I finished this month that I started reading. Oh, I want to say last month, but I actually think one of them I started reading in April. I think I started reading this in April. It is The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. It's Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso. And it's very hard to remember all of those. I was initially buddy reading this with a friend, but we kind of got out of sync, and then I ended up just putting it back down and didn't pick it up for a wee while. But I'm really glad I read it. It is basically about the spiritual journey of our protagonist, and he is living in 13th century Italy. It is a very strange book, very, very strange. It's a classic, it is a chunky boy, but I think I enjoyed it. I also finished Faster Than a Cannonball by Dylan Jones. This is a non-fiction book about 1995 in the UK. I actually misunderstood this book because I thought it was about 1995 to sort of mid-aughties in the UK. And coming off of the back of reading Reach for the Stars, I was very, very excited about that, but it was more about pretty much just 1995. A lot of politics, a lot of the Britpop movement, a lot of the young art crowd, and it was very interesting at points, but then there were some points that felt a little repetitive, and there was a lot of football. A lot of football chat. I didn't care. I'm not a football person. I would have really liked there to have been a little bit more about like TV and film in that year, because it was quite a big year, but it did focus more on like the Blur versus Oasis drama and politics, and there were a few sort of quotes from people that I sort of thought, oh, can we stop giving them a platform, please? Nobody wants to hear what Pierce Morgan has to say about anything. So this was interesting, but it wasn't as fun as I'd hoped it would be. It wasn't as gossipy as I was wanting, but it was informative, and it was a wee bit nostalgic. I also read You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Bayron. Only came out this month. It came out on the 20th of June. I was very lucky and I got an e-copy from NetGalley, but I had already pre-ordered it, so I'd read it. I had read it before I got it. This all takes place in a summer camp, but the summer camp puts on like escape room kind of thing where people are escaping from a slasher movie, a serial killer. And there is a point in this book where they realize that they are not in a sort of simulation and what's happening is real, and there are no adults around, and it's just left to the kids to sort of save the day and escape. More importantly, to just escape and save their lives. I love a slasher film. I love Scream, I love Halloween, I love Friday the 13th. I find them formulaic and almost relaxing because you know what's going to happen. I also find them scary, but because a lot of the films that I like to watch are old, I can Google them and find out when the jump scares are, and then I can watch it feeling relaxed. So I knew I was going to enjoy this because I love a wee slasher, and I love this author. She's never let me down, and she still hasn't. I absolutely love this. It was more than a slasher though, because there was some unusual goings on in the woodlands surrounding this cabin. There were creepy people that were up to no good, and I just felt like this book kept me on my toes, and it could have been formulaic and it could have been predictable, but I was kept guessing, and it's very short. It's only 230 pages or so it's a really quick read, but the ending, oh, I thought it was over and there was a twist and I was amazed, and then there was another twist and I was like, what? I thought this was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I am now not so cool with owls. Owls are now creeping me out, and I have made the mistake of saying I liked owls at one point, so now I have a whole lot of owl statues and like candles and things downstairs, and no, because now I'm looking at them with suspicious eyes. If you've read this book, you'll know why, and if you've not read this, I recommend you do. It's really quick. I read Death Under a Little Sky by Stig Abel, and this was about a man who had gone off to live in a very small village to get a new start. And while he's there, he finds himself tangled up in looking into the death of a woman some years ago. And people in the village really don't want him looking into this. And he gets threatened, and there are all of these things happening. People get hurt. And I didn't really like this book. I didn't really like the character, and I had guessed, I sort of guessed where the plot was going very early on. There was a romance that I thought was really cringy, and I just didn't like it. I'm moving on. I didn't like it. What I did like was The Sopranos by Alan Warner. This is a book about a group of teenagers, students who go off to Edinburgh to perform in a choir competition. And while they're there, they go a bit wild in the city. There's lots of alcohol, profanity, a lot of bad decisions are made, and this book was just fun. It was just fun. It was set in the mid-90s, so it was really nostalgic, and the dialogue was absolutely fantastic. It is some of the best and most authentic, I feel, dialogue for teens in the 90s, which is very, very specific. But I've read a lot of books that are sort of trying to channel dialogue, and I think it just doesn't feel authentic. But this, it just felt like I was reading conversations between my friends and I at the time. I thought it was absolutely spectacular. Really enjoyed the characters. They were flawed, but they felt real, and it was ultimately a story about friendship and finding yourself, and I just thought that it was fantastic. A lot happened in a mere 24 hours, but I really enjoyed it and I highly recommend. The Fair Botanists by Sarah Sheridan. This was recommended to me by a whole bunch of friends. I did take the sticker off, but I didn't take it off very well, and it's very sticky, which is very annoying. I'll have to take the hairdryer to it and try and melt off the glue. This is about a widow who finds herself going off to live with her husband's family in Edinburgh around about the time that they are creating the botanical gardens. And she meets a friend who isn't quite what she seems. And this was mainly about the friendship between the two main characters. I thought this book was okay, but ultimately it didn't do it for me. I didn't like the two main characters very much, but I did like the side characters a lot. And I would have liked to have had a whole book about the cousin Clementina. She was so fun. She was so just outrageous. And especially for Victorian times, I really enjoyed her and I would have wanted more of her. But Elizabeth, especially as a main character, was so boring. And I didn't care. She was so boring and judgmental. And I know it was Victorian times and attitudes were different and, you know, expectations were there. But for a main character of a book, I wanted a little bit more pizzazz or something. She just felt very flat. Belle was very interesting as a character too. She wasn't overly likable, but she was interesting, and I feel like the book just lost me a bit because I just didn't care about, you know, 50% of the main characters. Home by Kayleen Steed. This book is about a young woman also called Zoe. I've had 2 books with characters called Zoe this month. I think only 2. I don't think I've got another one. Zoe was born and raised in a cult, and she escaped and then finds herself going back to that cult to rescue her sister after swearing she would never go back. This is told through dual timeline, which I feel was really, really important to this story because Zoe, modern day Zoe, and originally in the cult, young Zoe. So the young Zoe goes right up to the point that she escapes the cult. And modern day Zoe is all about her returning to the cult. And you can really see the way that she has been basically brainwashed because the 2 timelines don't quite match. So it's very unreliable narrator, and I really, really enjoyed this book. It was so tense because I didn't know where it was going, and I really, even though I feel like I didn't really get to know Zoe, I feel like I still really got to like her because, I mean, she was a young woman going back to a place that she had fought so hard to leave, and she's tried so hard to find herself a safe space, and then she was going back out of the love of her sister and wanting to try and save her. This was such a very creepy book because it felt like it could be real, and I just thought it was so tense, so emotional, and just so, it was a difficult read, but I feel it was really, really worth it, and I really, really enjoyed it. This was a debut book as well, so I thought it was absolutely spectacular, and I'm so excited to see what the author brings next. I had another non-fiction, Carrie Kills a Man by Carrie Marshall. This was about Carrie Marshall and her coming out as trans. It was a very, very emotional book, but it was also filled with laughter and just joy. I read the audiobook and Carrie narrated it, and it was just, oh, a perfect narration. It was just such a sort of performance of an experience. I really enjoyed it, and it was really informative, and my wee heart, I really, really grew to love the author. And it was such a raw and vulnerable story, and I'm really, really grateful that it was shared because I got a lot out of it. What I didn't get a lot out of was Cursed by Marissa Mayer. This, gorgeous book. Gorgeous, gorgeous book. This is the second book in the Gilded series. I loved Gilded. I gave that 5 or 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was amazing, and I actually had bought this book before I bought Gilded because I judged it by its cover, and even though it had a sticker on it saying that it was the second part in a series, I didn't notice that, so I had to go and buy the first book and read that first. And I feel very strongly that I don't think this book needs to exist because it's the second half of a story, but the story didn't need to be split. It was a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, which is a really, really short book. It's so tiny. It doesn't need a 1,000-page duology. That was too much. This book for me, undid all of the excellent work from Gilded. I grew to dislike the characters. I felt the story just, it felt quite slow, and I think it could have really just been condensed into a fantastic, 50 pages and put onto the end of Gilded, and it would have been an amazing standalone. But this, it ruined the duology for me. I really didn't enjoy it. No. The Jane Austen book club by Karen Joy Fowler is about a Jane Austen book club. Just a group of people come together and chat about Jane Austen. But it felt so much more than that. Every chapter was about them talking about a specific Jane Austen book and focusing on one of the characters' lives. But as the book went on, their lives started to intertwine a little bit more. And I thought this book was quite heartwarming, quite lovely. They Do It With Mirrors by Agatha Christie. This was another reread for me, the second of my rereads this month. This is about a murder that happens, Miss Marple murder, when Miss Marple is visiting a friend that she's a little bit concerned about, and somebody attempts to shoot the husband of her friend, but all is well. They're fine. But all is not well for another person in that house, because it looks as if this is just a distraction because somebody else has been shot, and Miss Marple is on the case looking into it, and a lot of things come out of the woodwork and many things are revealed. I really enjoyed it. It's a very quick read and it's very fun, and even though I knew who done it and why they done it, I really enjoyed getting there and reading it. She and Her Cat by Makoto Shinkai. This is a very, very shiny book, which is very, I don't even know if it's going to come up because I can barely see my screen because it's so sunny and I am right in front of a window, making the most of having some natural light because we had a thunderstorm like an hour ago. So I'm making the most of it. This is a tale about 4 cats in just outside Tokyo and their respective, I don't want to say owners, the respective women in their lives that feed them. This was such a heartwarming story, and I am a crazy cat lady. I have my neighbour's cat is asleep right there, just off screen on my bed. He is sleeping like a beautiful lamb. I love stories about cats. I just, gets me. And I loved the way that this book was very much intertwined through the social lives of the cats. They all kind of knew each other, and their respective humans all sort of knew each other, some of them quite vaguely, but the cats just sort of brought everybody together, and it was a lovely little story, and I found myself sobbing hysterically, especially in the last chapter. I was a wee wreck, and I thought it was fantastic. I would definitely be rereading this now that I know what happens and I can be prepared. It was such a wonderful, wonderful story. The Dinner Guest by VP Walter. I was so excited about this book. I was so excited, and it didn't work for me. This is a locked room mystery. There are 4 people at a dinner party and 3 of them survive. 1 of them does not. And I really liked the format of this book. It's told through sort of, well, first of all, dual narrative between the person who says they did the murder and the husband of the person who's been murdered. And it also jumps through time here and there. So it was a very disorienting read, which I really, really enjoyed. And it also started with the murder. So it was really sort of interesting knowing who died, who said they did it, and then going through all of these chapters trying to find out why they did it. And I didn't guess why they did it. I think I would have enjoyed reading about the idea in my brain more than the actual reason behind the murder in this book. It felt, I was going to say unrealistic, but a lot of murder mysteries are unrealistic, but it just felt too unrealistic. And I didn't enjoy a lot of the character work, and the twist at the end just, it enraged me. I almost DNF'd this book just around the halfway point, but I wanted to know why, because we hadn't found out yet why the murder had happened, and I wanted to know. So I kept reading because I couldn't find spoilers and I wish I hadn't. I could have read something else. Let's Play Murder by Kezia Lupo. I found this book on a targeted ad, a sponsored ad on social media, and those ads are always usually rubbish. They're usually things I don't want, like horrible. I get a lot of adverts for shorts, actually. You get a lot of adverts for shorts and t-shirts, and I think I don't want them. That looks like something I wore in primary school. But for some reason I got an ad for a book and I thought, let me have a look, because the cover, cute. And then when I read about it, I thought, that sounds fantastic, and I bought it and I loved it. It is a murder mystery, but it's a murder mystery set inside a virtual reality world game. I don't know enough about computer games to even make it sound like I do. This takes place in a virtual reality simulation. 5 teenagers are competing for a prize. All they have to do is to solve a murder mystery. And while they're looking into it, one of the competitors is killed. And that's not supposed to happen in this game because it's all supposed to be just make-believe, but there is a real killer in the game, and it can only be one of the contestants because, well, everyone else is a non-playable character. And I loved this. I loved being able to just not trust anybody. There is unreliable narration, which is one of my favourite things in a book, especially in a murder mystery, and I was kept guessing throughout, and I didn't guess, didn't see it coming. I really enjoyed this book. It was such a quick read. I read this in 24 hours because it's a very generous font but also a very thrilling read, and it was so Moorish, and I was just like, one more chapter, and then there were no more chapters. It was all gone. I really enjoyed it, and it was just really fun. And my last book I'm going to chat about is my favourite book of June, my big recommendation of the month that nobody has asked for. Before I share this book, I would like to know what your favourite books were of the month. Let me know in the comments. And my favourite book of the month was Death of a Bookseller by Alice Slater. It's a gorgeous cover, but it's also got a gorgeous it's got gorgeous end pages and a gorgeous naked hardback. This book was fantastic. It is about a bookseller who totally doesn't work in Waterstones. No, it's another bookshop. And she becomes obsessed with her new colleague and sort of decides, we're going to be best friends, whether she likes it or not. And new colleague does not want to be best friends because she finds Roach, who is one of the protagonists. We've got Roach, who is somewhat obsessive, and we've got Laura, who wants nothing to do with her. I loved this book. It was told through dual narrative, and it very quickly, things spiraled out of control for both of the characters. So there were just spirals into absolute just bizarre behaviour that you know is not acceptable. You know you don't do it. But each of the characters just whirlwinded out of control, and I loved the chaos. It was chaotic, and I loved it. And I actually thought the book was going in a very obvious direction, and it wasn't, and I really liked that. And it was just bizarre, but such an enjoyable read. Again, I read this in 24 hours, which I think is that like the mark. I think that's maybe my new mark for how much I love a book, is if I can't put it down. And I didn't want to put it down. This was so quotable as well. I have actually taken a whole bunch of notes of just my favourite quotes, and I can see myself rereading this over and over and over because you know when like you sort of think, my personality is like a mixture of all of these books, and I feel like I need to add this to the list of books that sort of go in the Venn diagram of my personality. I also would like to say that once again, I have read a book and found elements of my own personality in it, and it's really scary because Laura, the object of Roach's obsession, owns clothes I own, uses bubble bath I use, and uses perfume that I use sometimes, and that's really creepy. She also wears berets, and I also wear berets, so it was very creepy sort of reading a book that's meant to be creepy, meant to be disturbing, and then you see items from your own wardrobe in the book. It adds an extra little element of just, oh, this book was just fantastic. I felt so on the edge of my seat and just creeped out, but in the best way. And it was such a fun story. And the author just has such an amazing way with words. I absolutely loved it. I felt like the dual narratives were two very distinctly different characters, even though they each had a descent into differing levels of not okayness. I felt like, oh, absolutely spectacular. Highly recommend it. I don't know if I can carry my pile of books that I read in June. No. I read this many. These are my physical books. Oh. And I'm gonna gently put them down, and they're not gonna fall over and disturb the sleeping cat, who's a precious lamb. So those were my reads for June. June was such a good month. I'm so excited to see what July brings. I hope more excellent reads. Thank you so much for watching.